Rob McLeod began every morning by looking at his daughter's website. She had disappeared in August 2003, a spirited, beautiful young woman who was 19 at the time. This tragedy was a cruel ordeal for the missing girl's parents, but it turned out she was far from the only victim in the story of a dangerous criminal. Today, we want to tell the story of the innocent victims of an incredibly dangerous man who hid his cruelties behind his cooperation with law enforcement agencies. Casey McLeod was born in 1984 in the state of Colorado. Her parents' names were Rob and Lori McLeod. Having had a child during their marriage, they devoted all their warmth and care to their daughter. Until her adolescence, the girl grew up carefree, completely shielded from the dangers and difficulties of the modern world. However, this carefree life of Casey did not last long. Later, her parents divorced, and she lived with her mother from then on. Her father often communicated with her during this time. The girl was 4 years old then. She was a cheerful, happy, bright child. The boundless love and care of her mother and father led, as she grew older, to a spoiled, unruly character that manifested itself during puberty. In high school, the girl fell into bad company, began smoking, quarreled with her mother, and behaved inappropriately. It was a rebellious teenage spirit that was received extremely negatively by her mother. The woman was tired of arguing with her daughter. At some point, she couldn't take it anymore, packed her daughter's things, and moved with her to Arizona to let her live with her aunt for a while. Casey's new home was Phoenix. Here, her behavior normalized. The girl met Tobita Martin, with whom she got along well, and over time they became best friends. At this point, they were both 16 years old. From the first days of their friendship, the girls understood each other perfectly. They were very close, went to school together, worked together in a restaurant, and spent almost all their free time together. According to Tobita, her friend got into bad company after graduation. There, she became addicted to smoking and began bringing dubious characters home. When her best friend Tobita noticed this, she called her aunt, with whom Casey was living, and told her about the problems. She then informed her mother, who immediately got into her car and drove to her daughter's house. The contact between her and Tobita did not break off but became even stronger. Tobita was very worried about her friend, so they remained in constant contact and cared for each other, even when they were far apart. As it turned out, Casey had been smoking illegal substances for months. In her opinion, she was a victim of circumstances, unlike ordinary addicts. She believed that she would be able to get her problem under control. After living with her father for several months, she came to her senses and returned to her mother. It turned out that during the time Casey was being cared for by her father, her mother had met a new man named Scott and was with him. This man was charming, loving, and caring. Life seemed to be getting better, and they began to live together. She got a new job and had long since separated from her bad company, in which she had been addicted to drugs. But after some time, the lie was uncovered. The parents found illegal substances in the house, and there was a serious conflict between them and their daughter. Casey claimed that she was not taking drugs, but that they apparently came from her old stash. The now 19-year-old young woman was convincing in her words and even agreed to undergo a test, but her parents could no longer believe the young rebel with addiction problems. The mother and stepfather threatened their daughter with turning her over to the police. There was a heated argument, whereupon Casey grabbed her bicycle and rode off to an unknown destination and did not return for a long time. The mother was worried. She drove around searching for her daughter but could not find her. This time, however, she had not just run away without reason, but after a serious argument. She had had similar outbursts of anger and tantrums before, which greatly upset her parents, but she always came back quickly. This time, her mother's heart felt that something disturbing had happened. Casey's biological father, Rob, learned from his ex-wife that his daughter had disappeared. The man was very worried, as he also participated in the search for his daughter, and just wanted her to come home as she had done before. However, 2 days had already passed, and Casey had still not returned. She didn't even show up for her shift at the diner where she worked. This finally worried the parents so much that Lori and Rob involved the police. Contrary to expectations, the police officers were not in a hurry to start searching for the missing woman. The police told the parents that they actually had no right to search for their daughter, that she was already 19 years old and could leave the house at will. She could do whatever she wanted and was not considered missing, according to the police. To file a missing person report, there must be suspicion that someone has committed a crime. The investigators believed that Casey was somewhere with friends and would return later, and they did not want to waste their resources on a troubled teenager. This police response left the family of the missing girl at a dead end. The only support the worried mother still had was her partner, Scott. It turned out that he had connections to law enforcement because the man was an FBI informant and helped catch criminals. When Lori talked to Scott about her daughter, he assured her that she would definitely be found. The man used his connections and actually helped Lori. The police finally began to investigate Casey's disappearance, and some clues were found, including the discovery that the missing Casey had returned to her mother's house after her disappearance when no one was there. This was confirmed by a necklace that had been left on the doorknob of her bedroom. She always carried it with her. She had disappeared and then suddenly reappeared. Later, the stepfather also spoke with neighbors, and one of them said she had seen the missing girl just a few days after her disappearance. The neighbor confirmed that she had seen her in the company of Casey herself, her boyfriend, and the sister of the boyfriend. During this time, Tobita, the best friend of the missing girl, also participated in the search. She called everyone who might know Casey, but no one had seen her. Tobita traveled to the city where Casey lived and participated in the search operation organized by the relatives of the missing girl. Then she set up a social media page for her friend to receive information about her. Tobita also shared flyers with pictures of her best friend that described her. The mother was so grateful to her new lover for his involvement and help in the search that she agreed to marry him, for he was her only hope and support in a difficult moment, and they began to live like a real family. The man continued to support Lori and kept her going. They made every possible effort to search for her. In this state, weeks and then months passed. It took over a year to realize that Casey had not really run away. Everyone was already sure that something much worse had happened to her. Tobita was sure that her friend had had an accident and was in trouble because otherwise she would have contacted her at the first opportunity. They had a close friendship and had never fallen out to the point where the relationship had broken down. Casey would not have ignored her. During this time, the mother of the missing girl also began to describe the worst scenarios that could have happened to her daughter. At this point, the father of the young, rebellious Casey and her best friend were frequently calling each other and analyzing various possibilities, and they began to wonder whether the key to Casey's disappearance might be closer to her home and family than previously assumed. They had their first suspicions. The questions that occupied Rob McLeod were where his daughter was, whether she was okay, and whether it made sense to wait for her at home. What the man did not know was that another father from Colorado named Howard Emery had exactly the same feelings. He lived near their city and had lost contact with his daughter in a similarly mysterious way, but much earlier than Casey disappeared. His daughter was named Len Emery and disappeared at the age of 24, only 7 months before Casey's disappearance. Howard went over the events in his head that had preceded the incidents. His daughter had been an excellent student. She had even managed to graduate from high school a year earlier than planned and went to college, where she stood out for her intellectual abilities. But then the young woman began to have difficulties. Her mother had health problems that prevented her from finishing college. Len had to take care of her mother and help her, so she dropped out of her studies. She also lost her promising job as a veterinary assistant, and her life went downhill. But at that time, nothing mattered to her except her mother's health. She dreamed of making her mother healthy again, and then planned to get her other problems under control, resume her studies, and find a new job. But life held new surprises for her. The compliant Len met an abusive boyfriend and fell completely under the influence of the manipulator. She married him. Her husband beat her, gave her no opportunity to communicate with her family, and kept her completely under control. According to the father, the daughter began to have psychological problems during this time due to this series of failures and manipulations by her husband. The woman believed she was nothing and could not achieve what she dreamed of. Her husband suppressed Len and reduced her self-esteem to a minimum. In the end, however, the woman found the strength and left the domestic tyrant. Her marriage broke up in 2002, but that didn't make things any easier. Len's father was worried that his daughter began a relationship with another bad guy, an ex-convict named Stephen Hawley. At the same time, Len became interested in caving. This became a mental outlet for her and an opportunity to find something new and change her life from scratch. On January 16, 2003, Len set off in her car from her parents' house on a trip. She wanted to go with her friends to Mexico to do speleology with a group of professionals. However, only 2 weeks passed, and Len's father received a call from the sheriff's office of Utah. The man was informed that his daughter's car had been found off the highways in a canyon. The car could be identified by the license plate, as the owner had a great fondness for Dalmatian dogs, which was also reflected in the unique inscription on the license plate. According to the police officer, most of his daughter's belongings were still in the car, Len's clothing and everything else, including equipment, but there was no trace of the woman. That seemed disturbing enough. The sheriff told Howard everything he could find out during the investigation of the scene. It looked as if Len had deliberately driven off the road and directly into the canyon. There were a series of boot prints and tire tracks from another vehicle. Everything indicated that the young caver had gotten out of her car and into another one. However, some of the tracks were trampled, as if some kind of struggle had taken place here. The sheriff suspected that something might have happened to the woman, as if she had been kidnapped. Howard rushed to the police station to report his daughter's disappearance near his home in Colorado. However, the man was also turned away, as they believed that his daughter was just having fun somewhere and would return home later. Therefore, the father was forced to conduct his own investigations. The man first checked the transaction history of the woman's bank card and collected all the other data he could find. Based on the payment records, he was able to reconstruct her route, where she had traveled in the weeks before the call from the police station. Howard was confused, as everything indicated that she was leading a double life. She had not traveled to Mexico, but had spent the 10 days before the call traveling around the western states. During this time, she had issued numerous forged checks and spent thousands of dollars using her father's credit card. This was completely uncharacteristic of Len. She was frugal and modest in her expenses, and the card had been given to her by her father for emergencies when she might need money. Therefore, the man was sure that she was either being blackmailed or intimidated through threats, or that the money from the card had been withdrawn by someone else. The daughter simply could not have done all this alone and spent so much money. Howard was able to access her email account during his investigation and found out that Len had sent several emails to her cousin a few days before her departure. There were hints of problems, but Len assured her cousin that she was protected by a certain Hannibal and that everything was okay. The father didn't understand at all who they were talking about. At that time, her boyfriend Stephen, whom the woman had met after separating from her abusive husband, was still in prison, where he was serving a sentence for illegal substance trafficking. The father visited Stephen in prison to talk to him. Perhaps he could give him some clues. The friend told him that Hannibal was the nickname of one of his acquaintances, and he was a very violent man. If Len got involved with him, she was in great danger. He immediately advised him to notify the police. Hannibal was a former cellmate of his. He could kill a person very quickly and easily, and he knew many people who would not hesitate to kill the woman on his behalf. However, the friend of the missing woman refused, despite the father's pleas, to reveal the identity of this mysterious Hannibal, as he feared for his life. The alarmed Howard then did not turn to the police, who ignored his statement, but to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He told the FBI agents everything he knew about Hannibal, but they didn't believe him either, as they thought everything was just made up. The father's concerns were once again ignored, and the FBI did not pursue the case of the missing 24-year-old woman. Both fathers continued their own investigations. The discovery of Hannibal's mysterious identity, however, gave these independent investigations new impetus. Later, it turned out that this mysterious stranger worked for the Federal Bureau of Investigation and was married to Lori McLeod, the mother of the missing Casey. It turned out that Hannibal's real name was Scott Kimball. Even Lori herself had begun to suspect his involvement in her daughter's disappearance at that time. Her doubts emerged only much later after the wedding. From time to time, he made eerie jokes and said strange things that scared the woman, and she had questions for her new husband. Lori often had the feeling that something was wrong with her new husband. He gave confusing answers to all questions related to the missing daughter, and then the woman found Scott's work uniform and Casey's personal diary while searching his things, which should not have been in his possession. Amazingly, it took a whole 6 months before the ex-wife informed Rob McLeod that Casey had not only been missing for an entire weekend when she was last seen, but that Scott himself had left on the same days, which later led her to suspect his involvement in the possible crime. These were not the only events related to the man that worried those who knew him. At the beginning of 2006, he was involved in a criminal case being investigated in Lafayette, Colorado. The police first became aware of him when they were investigating a case of check fraud. Scott had connections to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, as he was a criminal informant. Furthermore, it turned out that the man was a con artist who had spent most of his life in prisons in the western United States. However, it was not possible to catch Hannibal while he was on the run. A warrant would have been issued for the arrest of the suspected informant, but it took more than 2 months to track the man down. The arrest required participation in a massive chase that took place along the Coachella Valley in California. The criminal could finally be stopped and arrested. The experienced criminal, however, did not want to give up even when he was handcuffed. Unfortunately, the investigations into the involvement of the prisoner in several cases of the disappearance of young women did not begin immediately after the investigators' work. Another name was added to the list of missing persons in which the man might be involved. The name of the third missing person was Jennifer Markham. She had disappeared several years earlier from the view of family and friends. It also happened in Colorado. The 25-year-old Jennifer Markham was a single mother who earned her living as a dancer in a nightclub. She was waiting for her imprisoned boyfriend from places not too far away. His name was Steve Ennis. Shortly after this event, Jennifer also disappeared. Her father, Bob, did not understand what had happened to his daughter, but suspected that Jenny might have been in trouble or even behind bars. Only a year after the police report did her father receive a call from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, informing him that his daughter might be in trouble. She herself had not yet been found, but her car had been found abandoned at Denver Airport. The parents found out that the authorities had discovered the woman's car much earlier than they had been told. They continued to demand answers from the investigators, and then Jennifer's mother was given the opportunity to contact Scott Kimball. The informant said that the daughter of the Markhams had been killed by an illegal drug dealer who was involved with her boyfriend. He said the missing woman had been tied up and strangled. But the most frightening thing was the end of the conversation with Scott. He said he could take the mother of the murdered woman to the mountains the next day and show her where her body was. However, the parents of the missing woman did not accept this offer. They were afraid of him and literally believed that this would be their last journey. In any case, the father was certain at the end of the conversation that it was the informant who had killed his daughter, and that he wanted to get rid of them by suggesting they go into the mountains. And all because he spoke with a frighteningly threatening voice and told everything in such detail as if he had been there and seen everything with his own eyes. Jennifer's parents went to the police officers to express their suspicion, but no one wanted to listen to them because the investigators trusted Kimball, who had been working for them for a long time and had a certain level of trust. And this time, the parents had to take the investigation into Jennifer's disappearance into their own hands. The father ordered a small billboard with a photo of his daughter, which he set up near the nightclub where his daughter danced. In this way, they hoped to receive information, and it worked. In June 2006, Rob McLeod, the father of the missing Casey, happened to come across the story of Jennifer's father. He recognized his billboard and read it. The story of Jennifer's disappearance bore great resemblance to the story of his daughter's disappearance, so the man contacted him. In the course of the conversation, Rob McLeod learned some shocking facts. He heard the name of Scott Kimball, which had been mentioned by Jennifer's parents. Rob also suspected that Scott had something to do with Casey's disappearance, so they arranged a meeting to go over all the details and work together on the investigation. Later, they met the father of the missing Len Emery and also worked with him. Scott was also involved in their case. After that, Rob met with his ex-wife, Lori. He immediately asked her whether there had been other cases of strange behavior by her husband and mysterious disappearances of people during her time together with Scott. The woman quickly remembered that in 2004, Scott's uncle Terry Kimball had also disappeared. She also found that strange. After that, the families of the missing had a big trump card in their hands with which they could turn to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They reported to the office in Denver and shared their suspicions regarding the perpetrator, Scott Kimball. The relatives were sure that he was behind the disappearance of the women. Finally, the law enforcement officers listened to them and agreed that there were too many peculiarities in these cases, and all the threads led to Scott. So the agents reacted and began investigating instead of ignoring the whole series of disappearances. The investigations officially began only in the fall of 2006. In all these cases, the investigation revealed that Scott Kimball was driven by greed. The man wanted money, attention, and power. At that time, he was still in prison awaiting his trial for fraud. The investigators began talking to an informant from the Central Bureau of Investigation who was willing to show them the most sophisticated cat-and-mouse game they had encountered in their entire career. Scott lied constantly to confuse investigations. In one of his stories, he said that his uncle had fled to Mexico with a dancer after winning the lottery. When checking this information, the investigators found that he had not won anything and no payment had been made to him. They also found out that the uncle had some money before his disappearance. The uncle had earned some money after the divorce. The man constantly carried a briefcase with him containing several $1,000s that he had gotten his hands on. This seems to be the cause of his death. The second victim in chronological order was the dancer Jennifer Markham. She and Scott found out about each other when he was in the same cell as her boyfriend. It was in 2002. He saw pictures of the beauty and fell in love with her almost immediately. He began to assure his cellmate that he would like to help her find a normal, well-paying job, and the cellmate gave him the opportunity to help. But his real motive was to possess this woman entirely. At that time, Kimball convinced law enforcement that Jennifer and his cellmate were part of a criminal plan. He claimed to have uncovered a criminal gang involved in contract killings. Amazingly, the FBI agents believed the criminal. He was released in December 2002 and began working as an informant. Only 2 months later, Jennifer disappeared. During the investigation, the police officers spoke with Steve Ennis, who was Jennifer's boyfriend. He reported at the time that he suspected Scott and also believed that Scott was involved in the disappearance of the girlfriend of another ex-convict. His name was Steve Hawley, who was together with Len, and she had also disappeared. The investigators tried to contact her, but since 2003, this was no longer possible due to her disappearance. The investigators realized that she was another victim of Kimball. Len's photo was found on Scott Kimball's laptop. However, the law enforcement authorities had no bodies of the missing, no evidence, and no confession from the perpetrator himself. They continued to literally extract information from him, piece by piece. In April 2008, Scott finally gave a small clue. According to him, he was with a woman who died of an overdose of illegal substances in a national forest in Colorado. The police had a parking receipt indicating that Scott Kimball was in Walden, Colorado, near the national forest, on the weekend when Casey McLeod disappeared. It seems that he disposed of bodies in the area. The investigators then contacted the Forest Service and tried to find out whether bodies had been found there and whether they had received similar reports. The dispatcher replied that there had been no such incidents except for what had happened in the winter. A skull had been found there. After investigation, it turned out to be Casey McLeod. However, no further remains could be found, and the cause of death could not be determined based on the skull alone. From that point on, Casey's disappearance was finally treated as a murder case, and Scott became the main suspect. Scott Kimball was born in 1976 in Boulder, Colorado, into a broken family, which made his childhood extremely turbulent. He survived his parents' divorce and even had his first encounter with the police as a teenager when he fired a gun through his neighbor's window. When Scott and his brother moved into their grandmother's house, the neighbor raped them both, leading to Scott's psychological problems. He even tried to take his own life and shot himself in the head at the age of 23, but he was lucky. The bullet only grazed his skull, and paramedics saved his life. At the beginning of his criminal career, Scott was involved in several petty crimes, including credit card fraud. In his private life, he was unlucky. Scott married Larissa Huns in 1993. The couple had 2 sons, but the marriage could not be saved due to constant quarrels and conflicts. They divorced in 1997. Scott believed that the whole world was against him, and this was, as psychiatrists later believed, the main reason for the murders. The ex-wife later accused Scott of stealing from and raping her, but she failed a lie detector test, and her accusations were considered invalid. Nevertheless, he was soon arrested and imprisoned for fraud. After escaping from prison, Scott returned to his ex-wife to rape her a second time, although the rape report was never filed. When Scott was arrested in Alaska, he stood trial in connection with his escape. During his detention in Alaska, Scott convinced the FBI that he would spy for them, so he got away with a light sentence. However, this deal was extremely reckless because, after his release, Scott committed 4 heinous murders. Casey's mother, Lori, was shocked, for she had literally married the monster that had taken her daughter away from her and didn't even notice it for a long time. How could this man charm her with his charisma? But as everything came to a head, she divorced him. Lori believed that it was Scott who had planted illegal substances on the day she last saw her daughter, that he had started the argument because he knew that the impulsive Casey would leave the house and he would get a good opportunity to bring her to her senses. So far, however, the entire case was based on speculation. There was too little evidence against him, all of which could be dismissed as circumstantial and easily refuted with the help of a good lawyer. An extensive collection of evidence was required before the informant of the Federal Bureau of Investigation could be brought to trial. That changed in 2008 when Kimball was sentenced to 48 years in prison for his recent fraud and assault offenses. But the prosecutors wanted more. They wanted to hold him accountable for all the brutal murders he had been involved in. But that required more than just interrogations. So the law enforcement authorities offered the man a deal with a reduced sentence if he would lead the police officers to the bodies of his victims. Scott finally agreed, and in the winter of 2009, showed the locations in the canyons of eastern Utah where the remains of Kaiser and Jennifer could be found. A thorough search led the police officers to a single boulder lying in the canyon. Under the rock were found bones and a hairpin of a woman with a torn strand of hair. The forensic examination revealed that these were the remains of Casey, who had been lying on the lonely rock ledge for 6 years. Among the remains was also a bullet that was identical to one fired from Scott's weapon. The intruder then helped to discover the body of his uncle in this canyon, who had also been shot. However, there was a problem in searching for Jennifer's remains. The investigators searched the entire area indicated by Scott, but found nothing. It turned out that the perpetrator's story about the whereabouts of Jennifer Markham's body was entirely fabricated. Scott wanted to convince the police that he was not lying and telling the truth about Jennifer Markham's burial, and even went so far as to undergo a lie detector test. He suspected that her body had been found by someone and re-hidden. However, the investigators believed that he deliberately prevented them from finding Jennifer's body because he had a special connection to her. In any case, in October 2009, the families of the killer's victims gathered in court. Finally, they could see the Hannibal who had taken their daughters' lives from the front row. The parents of the murdered testified and complained to Scott that he had ruined their lives. Scott Kimball was charged with second-degree murder. As part of a deal, he pleaded guilty to being involved in the murders of 4 people. He was sentenced to 70 years in prison. He will be eligible for parole in 2082. In his case, he will probably spend the rest of his life behind bars. In his speech, the perpetrator emphasized that he was not a serial killer. Scott admitted that he had only killed his uncle Terry and was only indirectly involved in the death of the women. He spoke in riddles about his female victims and did not explain what it all meant. The defendant referred to them as part of a mechanism, but did not reveal what exactly it was and how it worked. It was clearly some kind of criminal plan. The circumstances suggested that they had died of an overdose, but there were great doubts about that. Scott had even said that he had help but refused to reveal which other people were involved in the events. What the prosecutor had not anticipated was that the reason for this was simple. They simply did not exist. According to forensic psychiatrists, the man had killed the women due to an unhealthy sexual attraction. For this reason, it was difficult for him to talk about it, and he also did not consider it murder. The search for Jennifer Markham's body continued even after Scott's conviction. However, her body was never found. The sons of Scott Kimball gave an interview and openly revealed that their father tried to kill one of his sons, Justin, when he was 10 years old. His father hit him on the head with a metal object, and he lost consciousness. Then he drove him to the hospital and tried to throw him out of the car at full speed. The boy suffered severe injuries and was placed in an artificial coma, which he miraculously survived. When Justin came to and told the story, no one believed him. The now adult son realized that his father wanted a payout from his life insurance, or $50,000 from the boy's insurance policy. He was the sole beneficiary. Scott Kimball is suspected of being involved in several other women's murders that were committed in Colorado at that time. According to the police, he may have killed 25 people. The bodies of some of the victims were found with a series of knots on a rope that resemble the knots Kimball used in the murder of his Uncle Terry. One of the women was wrapped in a baby blanket identified by Scott's son. Thus, the investigators are confident that there were many more victims. Thank you for watching and take care of yourself.
Luca Rocco Magnotta, born Eric Clinton Kirk Newman, came into the world on July 24, 1982, in Scarborough, Ontario, Canada. Scarborough is a district of Toronto and the same area where the notorious killers Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka lived when they began their criminal activities. Scarborough has often been known as a socially burdened district, which meant that growing up there was difficult for many people. Luca's parents, Donald Newman and Anna Yorkin, had serious problems. Donald struggled with his mental health during much of Luca's childhood, while Anna suffered from misophobia and ran a strict family home, teaching her children mostly at home until 1988. She also often kept her children locked inside the house and punished them for the smallest mistakes. A friend of Luca later that he had told her about frequent beatings by his mother during childhood, and about his fascination with serial killers, especially Paul Bernardo and Karla Homolka. He also wrote posts on MySpace under the name Vladimir Romanov, claiming that his mother was extremely manipulative and that she kept him in diapers until the age of 7. On his blog, he also claimed that he had been abused by a male relative and that he had spent the money he earned as an escort on luxurious trips for his mother. Luca saw himself as better than other people and created an alter ego and separate lives for his own entertainment. When his parents divorced, he moved in with his grandmother Phyllis in Lindsay, Ontario. There, Luca began attending a regular high school. However, he was constantly bullied and beaten by other children. Even so, he continued to believe that he was better than everyone else and that he would become famous. In 2001, Luca came to Toronto in search of success. He soon realized, however, that becoming famous would be harder than he had expected. To survive, he began working as an escort and dancer. In 2003, Luca appeared in adult films. He was looking for money and was willing to deceive anyone. Luca tricked a woman with a developmental disability into going home with him, where he harmed her and stole her identity, as well as thousands of dollars. In 2004, he faced criminal prosecution for the first time. In 2005, Luca appeared in Fab magazine, one of Toronto's major publications. The magazine was published every 2 weeks for almost 20 years and featured male models. In that issue, Luca appeared under the pseudonym Jimmy and claimed that he came from Russia and wanted to become a police officer. Photographer Tony Fong said of him, "I remember his dark hair and that, compared with the other Fab models at the time, he looked fairly good." He said he had recently lost a lot of weight and wanted to become a model. Around the same time, Luca was seeing a woman named Julie, who claimed that he was extremely self-absorbed and passive-aggressive. He never wanted to be physically close to her, except to hold her hand, and he was obsessed with posting his photos and videos on social media. He created more than 70 social media accounts and 20 websites. On many of them, he used his real name and his own photo. On others, he's used different names but his own photos, and on the rest he's used the names and photos of other people. He did all this to increase his popularity and spread false rumors about his modeling career. In 2006, he changed his name to Luca Rocco Magnotta and began traveling through different countries as an escort. He also tried to take part in the reality show Cover Guy on Out TV and in the show Plastic Makes Perfect, but he did not pass the auditions. These failed attempts turned Luca into an even darker version of himself. After he failed to gain any meaningful fame by 2009, he began posting much darker material on social media, including a video in which a person was bitten to death and videos showing animals being abused. He may not have caught Hollywood's attention, but he did catch the attention of a large group of animal rights activists. At the end of 2010, he posted a video titled "One Boy, Two Kittens," in which kittens could be seen inside a plastic bag while a man used a vacuum cleaner to remove the air. That disturbing video went viral in every sense, as internet users wondered whether it was real or not. Animal rights activists created a social media group called Find the Vacuum Kitten Killer for Great Justice. The organization Rescue Inc. promised a reward for anyone who could provide more information about the killer. In the Netflix documentary series Don't Fuck with Cats, Hunting an Internet Killer, viewers were introduced to people on the internet who had begun investigating the kitten video, including Deanna Thompson and John Green. The members of the social media group analyzed the video and tried to find out where the man lived. They started with the account that had posted the video and realized that it had no followers, but that it had liked the trailer for the film Catch Me If You Can. They also noticed that a Russian television series was playing in the background of the video. The group members quickly realized that this man was methodically tricking them all in order to hide his true identity. Soon afterward, a fake account posted a link in the group to another video in which the same man played with dead kittens. Photos of kittens in a refrigerator were also posted, along with an image of a man holding cats, but his face was blurred. It was clear that the man sharing this content wanted to become famous. Joseph Panzarella from Rescue Inc. discussed the video with his sister, a psychologist, who told him that the videos were meant to attract attention and that the man showed clear warning signs that he could become a killer. The social media group exploded with thousands of followers, while Luca, using another fake account, posted another message: "I kill little kittens and film it." That fake account also posted a video in which someone locked a cat in a cage and set it on fire. These horrifying posts led Joseph to ask the fake account directly whether it was the person who had created the video, "One boy, two kittens." The fake account replied, "Yes, that's me." The group tried to track him down and eventually discovered that many of the account's friends appeared to be from Namibia in southern Africa. Since a fake account used the first name, Jamie, they found a person with the same name in Namibia and pursued him so relentlessly that he took his own life. Some people who had not taken part in the online vigilantism, such as Deanna and John, were horrified when they learned what had happened. Once the investigation quieted down, another fake account sent several members of the group an email saying that they had chosen the wrong man and should look for someone named Luca Rocco Magnotta. Ironically, Luca was so obsessed with trying to become famous that he handed himself over to the internet investigators. When Deanna and John began searching for Luca online, they were shocked by the excessive number of accounts connected to him and by all the rumors people had written. They then created a private social media subgroup called Luca Intel, adding only people they trusted, and began sharing the information they had found about Luca. After watching Luca's audition video for the reality show Cover Guy, the group members realized that the show was produced in Canada. They also noticed that his photos were heavily retouched and that his supposed online fans all said the same things about him. It became clear to them that Luca was building a fake life on the internet to appear as a successful model with many friends, even though in reality he was psychologically unstable. Deanna also found a video online from the Toronto newspaper The Toronto Sun, in which Luca said in an interview that rumors about his relationship with Karla Homolka had ruined his modeling career. She then began searching for one of his photos using metadata, which can sometimes reveal the location where a photo was taken. She discovered that one photo showed GPS coordinates pointing to a Toronto shopping center called the Eaton Centre. Since the photo had been taken in 2010 and the cat video had been released that same year, they had proof that Luca was very likely in Toronto. John found a photo of Luca standing on the balcony of an apartment near an intersection. In the background, a gas station could be seen. He began checking all Petro-Canada gas stations in that area and discovered that there were hundreds of them. Then John remembered a post in which Luca complained that paparazzi had tried to photograph him while he was in his apartment in Etobicoke. John then checked the Petro-Canada gas stations in Etobicoke and found that there were only 6. With the help of Google Maps, he found the location where the photo had been taken. John then contacted Toronto police, who went to the address to ask about Luca Rocco Magnotta. There they learned that Luca had indeed lived there, but had recently moved to Russia. Several weeks passed, the trail went cold, and the group did not know how to continue until 2 more videos appeared. In one, a cat was drowned in a bathtub, and in another, a cat was pursued and eaten by a python in the same bedroom where One Boy, Two Kittens had been filmed. The British newspaper The Sun picked up the story and published an article asking the public whether anyone recognized the man in the video. One of the reporters, Alex West, received a message from another fake account saying that the man he was looking for was Luca Rocco Magnotta and that he could be found at a hotel in London. Alex went there and found Luca. The reporter had a hidden microphone with him. When Alex asked Luca whether he was the man in the video, Luca began denying it. He said that many people were trying to slander him and ruin his career, but he did not name anyone. What kind of persecution? Anything you can imagine. But why are so many people saying that you are responsible for killing the kittens? No, that is not true. It was not me. I was simply framed. For what reason? All right, I think we should leave that for later. Yes, I think so too. Thank you. After the meeting, Alex received a letter from a man using the pseudonym John Kilbride, the name of a boy who had been a victim of the serial killers Ian Brady and Myra Hindley. The letter said that he would soon make a new video, this time involving human beings. Unfortunately, Scotland Yard was outside its jurisdiction and could not help investigate the case of Luca Rocco Magnotta. Many members of the group were worried that Luca would escalate and take a human life. At exactly that time, another fake account posted a comment in the group with a link to Deanna and a video from the casino where she worked. She now felt that the situation had become very serious because she could potentially be his next victim. In May 2012, a video titled "One Lunatic, One Ice Pick" was uploaded to the internet. In the video, an unknown person brutally attacked a man. The killer then cut up body parts, including the head, and committed appalling acts against the remains. The video spread rapidly online. People shared their reactions to it, and many thought it was impossible that it could be real. John sent the video to a Toronto police officer with whom he had been in contact when he found the Etobicoke address, and they suspected that a body would be found there. But that was not the case. Because of this, the internet investigators decided to take matters into their own hands again. While reviewing the many pictures Luca had posted online, they found an image with unique black streetlights in the background. When they searched online for streetlights across Canada, they found similar ones in Montreal. John and Deanna began using Google Maps to search the streets of Montreal in order to find the place where the photo had been taken. After several hours of searching, John came across a staircase leading to McGill University in downtown Montreal and immediately recognized the place where the photo had been taken. Shortly after the video was uploaded, Montreal police received a call from the superintendent of a small apartment building in the west of the city. He had discovered a large suitcase near a garbage bin, surrounded by flies and other insects. Police immediately went to the scene and sealed off the area. Inside the suitcase, investigators found the torso of a man. At the same time, a postal worker discovered a blood-stained package addressed to the Liberal Party of Canada, containing a severed foot. In a package sent to the national headquarters of the Conservative Party of Canada, a hand was found with a note that read, "Roses are red, violets are blue. The police need dental records to identify you." Another leg and another hand were later found at government schools in Vancouver, British Columbia. At the location where the torso was found, the medical examiner also discovered numerous garbage bags containing items left behind after the murder. Blood-stained clothing, bedding, a dead puppy, and several documents connected to Luca Rocco Magnotta. It seemed that, in his repulsive attempt to become famous, he had reached the extreme. Police found the exact address of the building in the bags and went up to the apartment. At first, officers assumed that the torso might belong to Luca himself. However, when they arrived at the apartment, they saw that the entire space had been cleaned with cleaning products. The only clue was a note written in red felt-tip pen inside the closet. It said, "If you don't like the reflection, don't look in the mirror." I don't care. At that point, they needed a search warrant. So they left the apartment and went to the police station. Homicide investigator Antonia Paradiso took over the case. She met with the building manager and discussed questions about the building's security. Fortunately, there were cameras at the entrance and in the backyard near the garbage bins. The investigator began reviewing the footage and discovered a man who went to the garbage bins more than 20 times in one night. In addition, the t-shirt he was wearing was found in a bag. Investigators quickly identified the man in the apartment building surveillance footage as Luka. An international manhunt for him was then launched. At the same time, while these investigations were underway, a man named John Lin, also known as Justin Lin, was reported missing by his family in the Chinese city of Wuhan. He was an international student at Concordia University in Montreal, where he was pursuing a bachelor's degree in computer science. Friends described him as a kind but naive person. On June 13, 2012, the body parts were identified as John Lin's after family members provided DNA. His head, however, was not found until July 1st in a park in Montreal. Investigators then searched the database for the name Luca Rocco Magnotta and discovered that he had used his own passport to leave the country shortly after the crime. The ticket had been purchased for Paris. Investigators contacted French police and continued the search for Luca in France. About 50 officers began looking for the young man. Thanks to surveillance cameras at Montreal Airport, they knew what he was wearing. Therefore, officers reviewed airport footage and discovered that he had entered a taxi. Police found the driver, who said that he had dropped the man off at a hotel called Novotel. Unfortunately, Luca did not spend the night there. Surveillance cameras showed him leaving the hotel that evening with his luggage. 3 years earlier, Luca had written another blog post about how to hide from police. The first step was to break off all contact with acquaintances. The second step was to convert all money into cash. The third step was to obtain fake identification papers. Ironically, Luca did not follow his own advice. Canadian police informed French police that Luca had used his credit card in Paris. He also contacted an online acquaintance named Jean-Christophe, who allowed him to sleep on his couch. Can you tell us about the circumstances of how he contacted you? The first written contact happened through the website Planet Romeo. It is a website for meeting people. If I remember correctly, I received a text message. It said, "This is Luca Rocco Magnotta. I am in Paris. We can meet. Tell us about his behavior while he was staying with you. He came in, he was polite and courteous. He seemed somewhat nervous. And what happened next? Nothing. What do you mean by that? I went to sleep and he slept on the sofa. Were there intimate relations? No. Was there any physical contact between you? No. Jean-Christophe went to the police after seeing Luca's face in the news and gave them the phone number Luca had used. He stayed until the next morning, but when I learned that he was wanted, I thought, is that really him? I had 2 pieces of information he had given me: the hotel where he had stayed and the second phone number he had used. I assume he bought that number in France. Why do you believe he bought it in France? Because +06 is the prefix for France. Police then searched the area where the number had been purchased and found a shady motel where Luca, using the name Kirk Trammell, had booked a room for 8 nights. In that room, officers found discarded documents and a t-shirt matching the one he had worn on surveillance footage, but Luca himself was no longer there. The following Monday morning, an employee at an internet cafe in Berlin, Germany, was going about his work. When a man entered the cafe, he began reading the news with great interest, and the employee quickly recognized him as the Butcher of Montreal, as Europeans had begun calling Luca. The man showed him to a computer and pretended to clean the cafe while watching him. When he walked behind him, he noticed that the man was looking at the Interpol arrest warrant for Luca. At that moment, the employee was sure that the Butcher of Montreal was sitting right in front of him. He quickly went out onto the street and called a police officer. Soon afterward, 10 German police officers entered the cafe to arrest the man. Ironically, Luca was caught because he was so obsessed with himself that he needed to know what was happening with his own case. When he was arrested, the Canadian military had to become involved in bringing him back to his country, because no airline wanted anything to do with him. When Luca returned to Canada, police began questioning him. The man pretended that another person named Manny Lopez was involved, and that this person had forced him to commit all the horrific acts he had carried out. There is evidence that, several years earlier, he had contacted police in Florida and said that he was being threatened by someone named Manny, but no investigation followed. In the Netflix documentary series, Luca's mother is a central figure. She is convinced that her son was forced to commit all those terrible acts. Many people say Luca's reason for killing cats and then moving on to killing humans was his desire for fame. Do you believe that could be true? No, that is the opposite of the truth. He is not the person they should be looking for. The mastermind is the one who must be found. The crucial point in this story is his lie to his mother. And now she is here, his most important defender. If Luca lied about things he claimed his mother had not done, what else did he lie about? In March 2013, Luca's preliminary hearing began, and June's parents came from China to watch how events would unfold. Family members cried as they heard the details of the terrible event that had destroyed their son's life. Luca used every possible form of chaos and at one point collapsed into the fetal position while the judge described his terrible crime. The trial was scheduled for September 2014, and when the day arrived, Luca Rocco Magnotta pleaded not guilty by reason of mental illness, while admitting that he had caused Junlin's death. With more than 60 witnesses, the trial lasted 2 months before the verdict was delivered. Ultimately, Luca Rocco Magnotta was found guilty of the murder of Junlin and was sentenced to life in prison. At the end of the proceedings, the prosecution read a statement from June's father about the consequences of the crime. In one night, we lost the hope of our entire lives. Our future became part of our past. We do not want to tell our story because it is too sad to repeat. We cannot say much about June without speaking about his murder. The murder did not only take our son from us, it also took away our ability to think about him and speak about him without feeling pain and grief. Luca did not testify during the trial and did not apologize to the victim's family even once. Although his lawyers were convinced that he was not criminally responsible at the time of June's murder, they were relieved to learn that he was now in a place where he could no longer harm anyone. Now to the story of Manny Lopez. If you are a fan of the film Basic Instinct, you know that the main character is named Catherine Trammell. Her unseen fiancé is named Manny Vasquez. When Luca moved from Paris to Berlin, he changed his name to Kirk Trammell. According to his mother, Basic Instinct was his favorite film. Even the viral video of his horrific crime was released in a way that echoed the opening of Basic Instinct, in which Catherine Trammell kills a man with an ice pick. No phone records prove that Manny ever existed. The rest of Luca's life is passing unused while he sits in prison. The only glimpse into his inner world is a profile on a dating website, where he says he is searching for his intelligent, beautiful prince. The repeated retelling of his story makes him even more infamous. Are we then guilty of keeping his story alive? Thank you for watching, and take care of yourselves. The student broke off contact with her relatives, and that was when they sounded the alarm. As soon as the police became involved in the search, the case took turns that would seem unbelievable, even in crime fiction. When investigators discovered the truth, the story became one of the most disturbing and frightening cases in the country's criminal history. Lauren Teresa Giddings was born on April 18, 1984, in the U.S. state of Maryland. She had loving parents and 2 younger sisters, with whom she was very close. Since childhood, Lauren had been deeply religious and wanted to help other people. For that reason, she decided to become a public defender, so she could stand up for people who could not afford a lawyer. She enrolled at Mercer University School of Law and moved to the city of Macon, Georgia. There, she studied with distinction and even became president of the university's Federalist Society chapter. She also had the opportunity to complete an internship at a law firm in Atlanta, where she met a man named David Vandiver, and the two began a relationship. After Lauren returned to Macon, they continued their long-distance relationship and planned to marry once Lauren had fully completed her path into law. In the summer of 2011, when she was 27 years old, she received her diploma, but the most important exam for obtaining her license to practice law still lay ahead of her. Lauren prepared intensely for several weeks, allowing herself to be distracted only by the wedding of her younger sister in Maryland. After that, Lauren returned to Georgia, where she attended a party with other students to celebrate the end of the academic year. Then she told all of her relatives that she wanted to focus completely on preparing for the bar exam over the next few days, and she asked them not to disturb her. From that moment on, Lauren had no contact with anyone. At first, her friends and relatives believed she was simply busy studying for the exam. A few days later, on June 29th, however, her sister began to worry. At that time, she was on her honeymoon and regularly sent Lauren photos from the trip. But Lauren did not even open the messages. That seemed very strange to her. Her sister knew that Lauren was studying, but the fact that she had not read her messages for several days seemed suspicious. Finally, Lauren's sister contacted one of her friends and asked her to check whether everything was all right. First, the friend tried to call her, but Lauren's phone was turned off. Then, she decided to go to Lauren's apartment. It was a small residential complex near Mercer University where many law students lived. The friend arrived there with her boyfriend, and the first thing they saw was that Lauren's car was still in the parking lot. Even so, no one answered when they knocked on the door, so the friend opened it with a spare key. The apartment was messy, but there was a logical explanation for that. Lauren was supposed to move to David's place the next day, so bags and suitcases full of her belongings were lying everywhere. Lauren herself, however, was not at home, while her purse, phone, and laptop were still there. All of it looked extremely strange. Where could Lauren have gone if she had left behind all her belongings and her car? Her friend contacted several mutual acquaintances, who immediately began searching for the young woman. They searched the university grounds and the nearby streets, but Lauren was nowhere to be found. They also began calling all of Lauren's friends, but no one had had contact with her for several days. When her relatives learned about this, they traveled from Maryland to Georgia. Meanwhile, her friends continued the search, but without success, and the next morning, they decided to contact the police. Officers came to the apartment complex and examined Lauren's apartment, but they found no signs of forced entry and no obvious signs of a struggle. Still, the police agreed that Lauren's sudden disappearance seemed suspicious, so they called in forensic technicians, who began spraying luminol throughout the apartment to search for traces of blood. At first, they noticed nothing suspicious, but when the forensic technicians reached the bathroom, the luminol revealed that almost the entire bathtub had been covered in blood. Based on that, investigators immediately suspected that Lauren was no longer alive. There appeared to have been several liters of blood in the bathroom, and the police focused on searching for the body. While they were standing outside, one of the officers noticed an unpleasant smell. He immediately recognized it as the strong odor of decomposition and began searching the area for the source. Nearby, there were trash containers, and when the officer approached them, he immediately realized that the smell was coming from there. When he opened one of the containers, he saw a large black bag containing a female torso. Although it was impossible to identify the deceased visually because the head was missing, investigators were almost 100% certain that it was Lauren. Nevertheless, they immediately decided to proceed carefully and not release any information about the discovery of the remains so they would not endanger the investigation. It is also worth mentioning that the discovery of the body was made possible by a whole chain of coincidences. The police arrived at the apartment complex only a few minutes before the trash containers were scheduled to be collected by the garbage truck, and they parked their vehicles in such a way that the large truck could not reach them. If that had not happened, the remains would already have been taken to the landfill, and it is very possible that no one would ever have found them there. While investigators waited for confirmation of the deceased woman's identity and considered their next steps, they learned something interesting. Lauren's relatives said that the young woman had repeatedly complained to them about strange things happening in her apartment. She had the feeling that someone was moving various objects around while she was not at home. At the same time, there were no signs of forced entry, and her door was always locked. This continued for quite a long time, and Lauren even began to wonder whether she was losing her mind. She also had the feeling that someone was watching her, but she never saw anyone. The young woman even bought a special anti-burglary device that locked the door from the inside, but the strange incidents continued. Shortly before she disappeared, she complained about it to her boyfriend, but he reassured her and said that it was most likely just some troublemakers playing around, and that they probably did not pose any danger. The police immediately checked David and found out that he had been in another state during the previous days and could not have committed the murder, so he was quickly removed from the list of suspects. Meanwhile, forensic technicians tried to find fingerprints or other traces in Lauren's apartment. However, it looked as if someone had cleaned the place very thoroughly and washed all the surfaces with cleaning products. After that, they decided to remove the entire bathroom and take it to the laboratory, hoping that DNA analysis would provide new evidence. In the meantime, medical experts confirmed that the torso belonged to Lauren, and the case was officially classified as a murder. They determined that the killing had taken place around June 26th, almost 3 days before friends and relatives began searching for Lauren. However, the experts could not determine the exact cause of death from the remains, nor could they find traces that fully explained every detail of the attack. Despite investigators' attempts to keep information about the case secret, all of this activity attracted the attention of journalists who came to the apartment complex to film reports. They also quickly heard rumors that the police had found a body, even though investigators had not officially told anyone about it. The investigators decided to question all of the victims' neighbors and search their apartments in case one of them had committed the murder. All residents of the complex, who were students at the same university, immediately allowed police officers to inspect their apartments without a search warrant. All except one, 25-year-old Stephen Mark McDaniel. He lived in the neighboring apartment and firmly refused to let the officers inside. He explained that, as a law student, he always protected his privacy and had nothing to hide. For investigators, of course, this was extremely suspicious. They began checking Stephen and discovered that he had been involved in the search for Lauren since the previous day and had also given interviews to journalists that morning. He was a friend of the victim and had studied in the same class with her. In addition, Lauren had been president of the Student Legal Society, and Stephen had been vice president. That meant the man knew the victim well. Yet, for some reason, he refused to let the police into his apartment. At the same time, he continued to be actively involved in everything happening around the apartment complex. He followed the police, spoke with other residents, and even gave an interview to a television station. During the conversation with reporters, Stephen described how he had entered Lauren's apartment, together with her friends, and then helped search the entire area for the young woman. While speaking, he referred to her in the past tense, even though at that moment, no one officially knew that a body had been found. Still, the rumors had reached the journalists, and they told him that the police may have found a body near the trash containers. The man immediately fell silent, and his facial expression changed in an instant. The reporter continued speaking to him, but Stephen did not answer. Then she asked him whether he was all right, and the man said that he needed to sit down. After that, he continued answering questions and seemed genuinely shocked by the news that a body had been discovered. After the journalist left, he remained sitting in the same place for a long time, staring at one fixed point. A few hours later, Stephen suddenly told the police that he would allow them to search his apartment. The first thing investigators noticed there was that he had stored supplies of many different items. He had stockpiled food, energy drinks, and weapons, but the most interesting discoveries were still ahead. They found a master key that fit all the doors in the apartment complex, as well as a separate spare key to Lauren's apartment. The man immediately admitted that he had entered several neighboring apartments while the residents were not at home. And he also said that he had stolen a package of contraceptives from one of them. For some reason, he added that he was a virgin, but he did not explain why he had stolen the condoms. The investigators decided to use the fact that Stephen had admitted to a crime, and they arrested him for burglary and theft-related offenses, then took him to the station for questioning. Meanwhile, police continued searching his apartment and found the packaging from a saw. Considering that the killer had removed parts of the victim's body, that discovery seemed highly suspicious. In addition, officers found 2 USB drives containing a large amount of illegal material involving minors, and in his closet, they found a pair of women's underwear. When investigators examined his computer, they found that Stephen had regularly visited Lauren's social media pages. He had also viewed violent and perverse adult material, and according to his browser history, he had opened photos of the victim during the same period. And that was not all. In the browser history, police also found links to a forum where Steeps wrote stories about murders and torture of women. One of his most recent searches concerned the trash collection schedule in the city. All of this information finally convinced investigators that he was involved in the murder. In their opinion, he had been obsessed with Lauren, considering that he had a key to her apartment and that Lauren had complained that someone was moving things around while she was away. The police had no doubt that he was responsible. Even so, they still did not have direct proof connecting him to the killing. During the interrogation, investigators tried to get him to confess. Stephen, however, behaved extremely strangely. For several hours, he answered their questions in a quiet voice and said only, "Yes, no, and I don't know." That seriously angered the investigators. But despite their attempts to make him talk, he remained calm and continued giving them short, meaningless answers. Investigators also tried to convince him that they had found his DNA at the crime scene and that a confession was the only way left for him to soften his fate. Stephen, who had studied law, did not fall for that tactic. Finally, investigators left him alone in the interrogation room, and the man sat in the same position for a long time, staring motionlessly at one fixed point. After the interrogation, they also asked him to remove his t-shirt so they could examine his body for fresh injuries, and they saw several scratches that could have been caused by fingernails. The man said he did not know where they had come from and that he had probably scratched himself in his sleep. The police realized that they would not get a confession from him, so they focused on finding evidence. They began searching every inch of the apartment complex, and soon they achieved a breakthrough. In a maintenance room, they found a saw that matched the packaging discovered in Stephen's apartment. The examination showed that it had been carefully cleaned, but experts still found particles of human tissue on it that belonged to the victim. Then, investigators traced the purchase of the saw back to a specific store and obtained surveillance camera footage from that day. The footage showed that Stephen had bought it. Police also checked the worker who had access to the maintenance room, and the man provided them with an alibi for the day of Lauren's murder. That left Stephen as the only person who had a key to all the doors, including that room. After that, investigators began examining Stephen's personality more closely and spoke with people who knew him. Everyone said that Stephen was a rather withdrawn and strange person, but at the same time very intelligent. They also said that he asked new acquaintances 2 questions: what they would do in the event of a zombie apocalypse, and how they would commit the perfect murder. Because of this strange behavior, he had practically no friends, and his classmates had no contact with him outside the university. Many of them noted that Lauren was the only person who tried to build a friendly relationship with him. Like everyone else, she also found his behavior strange, but she still tried to be kind to him. During the 3 years they were neighbors, Stephen asked her out several times. She politely refused each time. Aside from studying, Stephen spent almost all of his free time at home. His windows were constantly covered with curtains, and he never brought guests over. In the weeks after his arrest, police continued searching for additional evidence, but this led to nothing. They also tried to find more of the victim's remains, but they had no success there either. The only new result investigators received came from the laboratory, which showed that the women's underwear found in Stephen's apartment belonged to Lauren. Still, police soon found another piece of evidence that gave even experienced investigators chills. On one of the memory cards found in Stephen's apartment, they discovered a video recorded only a few hours before Lauren was murdered. Stephen had taken a long wooden stick, attached a camera to the end with tape, and held it up to the young woman's window in order to film inside Lauren's apartment. This recording finally convinced everyone involved that Stephen was connected to the murder. A few weeks after his arrest, the man was formally charged. In addition, he was charged with 30 counts related to possession of illegal material involving minors. While preparing for trial, Stephen insisted that he was innocent, while prosecutors announced that they intended to seek the death penalty. Stephen hired an attorney who had been one of Lauren's teachers. The attorney argued that police were trying to pin someone else's crime on his client, and that they could have planted all the case-related items in his apartment. He also tried to convince the judge to remove the death penalty from consideration, arguing that Lauren had always opposed that punishment. The judge, however, agreed with the prosecutor's position. Preparations for trial dragged on for several years. The prosecution understood that Stephen, with the evidence available at that time, Stephen had some chance of avoiding conviction, would require very clear proof of his involvement, while much of the evidence collected by the police was circumstantial, and his attorney could sow doubt among jurors. For that reason, prosecutors decided to offer Stephen a deal. Under the agreement, the charges related to illegal material involving minors would be dropped, and the death penalty would no longer be pursued. In return, the man had to plead guilty and reveal all the details of his crime. In the year 2014, 3 years after Lauren's death, he accepted the deal. According to Stephen, at around 4:30 in the morning, he dressed completely in black, including a mask and gloves, and then used a key to enter the victim's apartment. He managed to get past the security device that locked the door from the inside. Then he went into Lauren's bedroom and watched her sleep for a while. At some point, the floor creaked beneath Stephen, and she woke up. When she saw the masked man, she ordered him to leave her apartment. Stephen, however, immediately attacked her. He began strangling Lauren while she tried to free herself. At one point, she managed to tear the mask from his face, and she realized that it was Stephen. She begged him to stop, but he did not listen. This continued for about 15 minutes until Stephen convinced himself that Lauren was dead. He took her body into the bathroom, where he left it until the next day. The following evening, he returned to her apartment with various tools, including a hacksaw, and over the course of several hours, he cut the body into pieces. He packed the victim's remains into plastic bags and threw them into different trash containers near the university. He decided to throw the torso into a container next to the apartment complex, hoping that the garbage service would soon take it away. Afterward, he cut up his t-shirt, gloves, and mask and flushed the pieces down the toilet. Stephen claimed that he did not know why he had killed Lauren. According to him, after the crime he entered a state of confusion and believed that the young woman was still alive, which was why he actively participated in the search. Prosecutors, however, did not believe Stephen's explanation of his motive. In their view, he had been obsessed with her, which was shown by his repeated visits to her social media pages and by the video he recorded through her apartment window. In addition, based on his pursuits and his history of consuming violent, perverse content, they believed he had fantasies about causing women pain and suffering. Considering that Lauren was supposed to move out of the apartment complex within a few days, Stephen may have decided to kill her because he knew he would never see her again. In any case, the man's confession was enough for a conviction, and he received a life sentence with the possibility of parole in 2041. 4 years later, Stephen filed an appeal. This time, he represented himself. According to Stephen, the police had repeatedly violated his rights from the beginning of the investigation. He said they shouted at him during the interrogation and did not allow him to use the bathroom without permission. Stephen also claimed that, because of all the stress, he had suffered a seizure. According to him, investigators refused to let doctors see him unless he allowed them to search his apartment. In addition, he accused his former attorney of poorly representing his interests. The attorney replied that Stephen had received a life sentence with the possibility of eventual parole instead of the death penalty, which, considering the crime committed, was a very favorable deal. Despite all of this, Stephen's appeal was denied. In the year 2022, he filed another appeal, but it failed as well. It should take me that some of Stephen's relatives continued to believe that he had not committed the crime and had been framed by police. Stephen's father even created a page to raise money for a lawyer for his son. However, no one donated even a single cent, and the page was quickly removed. Stephen therefore continues to serve his sentence, although he still has not given up trying to challenge the judgment. Even so, many legal observers believe that he will not be released even after his parole eligibility date, and that he may spend the rest of his life behind bars. Thank you for watching, and take care of yourselves. Traditional values can often bring a family closer and make its bonds stronger, but only when they do not turn into constant tyranny and total control. Today's story is about traditions that led to one person being killed in order to save several lives. Akyad Sulayev was born in Chechnya. He grew up in a conservative family whose worldview was based on traditional values and the beliefs typical of that region. Everyone lived under fairly strict conditions. His father kept everyone under iron control and demanded unconditional obedience. This applied primarily to women. The boys were punished less often. Physical violence was always considered normal. The father was the head of the family and provided for everyone, while Akyad's mother took care of the children. The woman lived in an atmosphere of control. At the slightest act of disobedience, her husband punished her quite harshly. The protagonist of this story observed all of this from an early age and therefore considered it normal. The Sulayev family had many children. However, the father's income alone was not enough to feed everyone, so they lived quite modestly. From a young age, Akyad thought about moving to another country. He chose Italy because it was possible to flee there through humanitarian corridors. The man had not received a proper education, but he had practiced sports from an early age, which allowed him to work as a karate and boxing trainer. He was tall, athletic, and had even completed military training. Even before moving to Italy, he found a woman named Natalia, with whom he started a family. By 2005, he already had 4 children. Finally, the opportunity to move appeared. Together with his wife, his sons, and his 2 daughters, he arrived in the small town of Nizza Monferrato, in the province of Asti, Italy, which had about 10,000 residents. The couple moved into an apartment building. Natalia immediately found work at a local hotel. She worked as a dishwasher. Following the example of his father, Akyad was also very demanding and quite cruel toward all members of his family. However, he punished his sons only when they got into trouble. His wife and his eldest daughter, Maka, on the other hand, were completely controlled by him. Akyad also began working, but because of his lack of education, he could only count on poorly paid jobs. Despite his experience as a trainer, he had no opportunity to return to his old hobbies. He was constantly looking for a better job in order to support his large family. While Natalia and Maka integrated into the local community, the head of the family did not even manage to learn Italian properly. Because of the language barrier and his difficult character, it was hard for him to keep a job. He often changed workplaces, which only made life more difficult for everyone. At times, it seemed as though everything rested entirely on Natalia's shoulders. Despite moving to Europe and living among the traditions of another country, the father of the family held on to his conservative views in his new home as well. Following his own father's example, he also strictly controlled the women, especially his wife and daughters. Maka Salaev had faced her father's cruelty since her earliest years in Chechnya. She lived in an atmosphere of excessive control and watched as Akyad constantly terrorized her mother. After the move, however, the situation improved somewhat. The control remained just as brutal and total, but incidents of physical violence became slightly less frequent. Akyad probably understood that Italy had different traditions and that his behavior could lead to problems with the law. Still, impunity never benefits brutal people. Maka watched her father's aggression and always wanted to protect her mother, but because she was still young, she could not do it. The girl had to endure it and simply watch how cruel her father could be. Not only was she unable to stop his behavior, but as she grew older, her father began beating her in the same way he beat her mother. This became especially clear when Maka turned 16. After the move to Italy, she was frightened and depressed, but she had become so used to that atmosphere that it seemed normal to her. In Chechnya, it had been like that everywhere around her, but in Italy, the girl began attending a local school, quickly found common ground with other teenagers, and saw a different side of life. Her Italian friends, with whom she began to talk, described a completely different life, one that had nothing to do with what Maka's family was going through. The teenager began to understand that life could be completely different, far from her father's terror and cruelty. However, she found no understanding at home, and she did not dare complain to her friends. Only when Maka took a part-time job at the same hotel where her mother, Natalia, worked, did one of the managers notice the marks left by the beatings. Later, Maka developed a friendly relationship with this woman. She was the only one who knew the real situation inside the Sulev family. Both Maka and Natalia received sympathy and support from her. In reality, however, Maka wanted to save herself and her mother from the attacks of her aggressive father. The girl understood that she could not physically oppose him. He was a tall, athletic man who was still full of strength. To suppress any resistance in his family, one blow from him was enough. He criticized everything and focused on every little detail. Whether it was dust on a windowsill or an item of clothing that had not been put away. It did not matter to him that the clothing might have been placed there only a moment earlier. It seemed as though Akyad was simply looking for a reason to complain and provoke conflict. His behavior became even worse because of financial problems, since life after the move was not easy for him either. Because of his low level of education, he could not count on a well-paid job, and therefore took work as a laborer. Even after years, He still spoke the language very poorly, which did not help him either. There was little work available. The money was barely enough to cover the family's basic needs, and the situation did not change. Meanwhile, the children were growing, and their needs were becoming greater. Against this background, the conflicts only became more severe. For a long time, Natalia could not stand up to Akiad. At the slightest disobedience, he would pull her by the hair. Very often, he called his sons to watch these scenes, while he beat his wife, and sometimes his daughter as well. He told his children that this was how women had to be treated. In his view, they were on the same level as animals, and therefore had to obey without question. If something did not suit him, physical violence was completely acceptable. The man knew exactly how to hit without leaving bruises. For that reason, Maka's mother could not turn to law enforcement. Because he felt unpunished, he became even more vicious. At the end of 2023, the situation spiraled out of control. This time, Akiad threatened violence for the first time and beat his wife very severely. The woman went to the police and stated that her husband had attacked and threatened her. However, when the Carabinieri arrived, no one could prove anything. Natalia could not confirm it physically because he had left no bruises on her body. Maka stood by her mother. The girl told the Carabinieri that her father had punched her in the stomach. That was his favorite method. He knew how to strike in a way that took a person's breath away without leaving visible marks, and afterward, he would brutally pull them by the hair. Usually, in such moments, the woman would curl up on the floor while the father told his sons that this was the only correct way to discipline a wife. Despite the daughter's support, the officers did not believe the woman. Feeling safe from punishment, the tyrant became even harsher at home. Maka spoke with her mother many times and tried to convince her to leave Akiad. But he had frightened the woman so deeply that she did not even dare think about it. After the last incident, when she had gone to the police, the man said that if something like that happened again, she would die. Maka saw her mother's critical situation, worried deeply about her, and believed that sooner or later Akiad would beat her to death, even if she did not turn to anyone for help. The girl felt powerless, but that only made her want to help her mother even more. March 1st, 2024, was an ordinary day for the Sulev family. Maka went to school in the morning. Nothing suggested that disaster was coming. However, she would not have been the least bit surprised if her father started another argument during that time or after her return. In the afternoon, the girl received a disturbing message from her mother. Natalia asked her to take care of her brothers and sister if something happened to her. Since she had never made such requests before, Maka became frightened. She immediately asked to be excused, left class, and headed home. On the way home, she received a message from her father on Messenger. "When you come back, I will tear your head off." When the girl arrived home, she was met with an unpleasant sight. Her father was once again shouting at her mother. From the conversation, Maka understood that he had been fired again. This time, it was from the same hotel where he had worked with his wife and daughter. All of this had happened amid conflict, and afterward, out of pride, he demanded that his wife leave the hotel as well. He had even come to the workplace while Natalia was there, made a scene, but could not answer to the woman's simple question. What were they supposed to live on then? The woman refused to obey him. He left the hotel, but when Natalia came home, the conflict continued. The mother and father were screaming in the kitchen. Maka wanted to stop the man, but she could not gather the courage. He was furious again. The 18-year-old student knew that any attempt to resist could end badly for her. To avoid bloodshed, the girl went to her room. At that time, the other children in the family were also in their bedrooms. The argument continued, but she hoped her father would calm down and that everything would be over. In such moments, Maka often picked up her diary and wrote short notes in it. It helped distract her and calm her down a little. She did the same this time. But she had not even written a few lines when she heard the situation in the kitchen escalate sharply. Dull blows could be heard. Then she left her room and saw her father throw her mother to the floor and kick her. The daughter tried to stop him, and for the first time in her life, struck him with her fists. Akyad was so surprised that his daughter had raised her hand against him that he hesitated and froze for a moment. That allowed the girl's mother to get up. She continued, trying to calm her husband because she now feared that he would turn on her daughter. The man did exactly that and struck Maka. Natalia stepped in front of her to protect her. The man hit Natalia again, threw her to the floor, and began choking her. He shouted that he had such a daughter because of her rebellious mother. The situation immediately went out of control. Maka threw herself at her father again and tried to pull him away. But, of course, the slender young woman did not have enough strength to stand against a boxer with military experience. Still, she did not want to give up. The girl understood that her mother would eventually die if she did nothing. Maka took a large knife and stabbed her father in the back with all her strength. That instantly disoriented Akyad. He let go of his wife. Judging by the heavy bleeding, the wound was serious. Nevertheless, he got up, went to the front door, and locked it from the inside. It was obvious that the man was still dangerous and did not intend to stop. Akyad moved toward his daughter, but she attacked him again with the knife. The floor was covered in blood. After the second stab wound, the man became so weak that he fell to the floor. Natalia rushed to her daughter to help her. Maka threw the bloody knife onto the floor. She pressed herself against the wall and trembled as she watched in horror while her father bled out. The other children ran out of the room and gathered around their father. Natalia sent them back and called emergency services herself. The woman stated that her husband had tried to kill her, which was why her daughter had stabbed him several times in self-defense. Within minutes, Carabinieri and paramedics arrived at the house. The 50-year-old Akyad was seriously injured, barely breathing and lying on the floor. He had lost consciousness because of blood loss. The man was immediately taken to the nearest hospital, where he was pronounced dead. Akyad could not be saved. The later autopsy showed that the first injury had already been fatal. When the police arrived at the home, they found the girl in a state of shock. She was still standing with her back against the wall. When she saw the police officers, she immediately confessed that she had attacked the man with a knife and justified her actions as self-defense. According to the student, her father had first attacked her mother and then her, and had tried to strangle the woman, which forced her to attack him with a knife in order to stop the assault and save her mother's life. Natalia confirmed all of this. She showed the police officers several bruises and claimed that she had been beaten systematically. There could have been many more marks if Akiyad had not known how to strike correctly. The most telling evidence was the marks on her neck left by the man's hands. Before going with the police officers to the station, Maka handed them her diary, in which she had described the constant beatings. The girl was convinced that it could be used to justify her actions. Maka insisted that she did not want to kill anyone. She only wanted to frighten him and stop him. She could no longer endure that nightmare in her home. The initial inspection of the apartment showed that the knife she had used did not come from the kitchen. During the investigation, it emerged that she had bought it herself at a supermarket shortly before the tragedy. Maka explained this by saying that her father was much taller and stronger than every other member of the family. For that reason, she believed that an ordinary knife would not be able to stop him. At the same time, she feared that an attack with a small knife would only make him even more enraged, and that he would leave neither her nor her mother alive. That was why she had bought a larger knife in advance as a precaution. The claim that the girl and her mother had been systematically beaten was also confirmed by her brothers and her younger sister. However, the fact that the girl had bought a large 30-centimeter knife for self-defense was interpreted by law enforcement as preparation for murder and as an intention to kill deliberately. The young woman's diaries were carefully examined. They contained numerous entries. She had recorded dozens of incidents of beatings against her mother and herself, accumulated over the years they had lived in Italy. The young woman claimed that everything had already begun in Chechnya. But those entries from her earlier diary had not survived because of the move. During an almost 12-hour interrogation, Maka Sulayev insisted that she did not want to kill anyone and tried to justify her actions as self-defense. At the same time, the girl regretted what she had done and admitted responsibility. The investigators continued collecting information, spoke with the family's closest circle, and with neighbors, but not everyone, confirmed that Akiyad had terrorized his family. During the examination of digital storage devices, investigators found a message that Maka had received from her mother shortly before the tragedy. It did indeed sound alarming. In addition, all of this was confirmed by a message that Akiyad himself had sent to one of his acquaintances. A few hours before his death, the head of the family said that he wanted to put on a concert. Witnesses from the Chechen community who knew the family and lived in the town confirmed that Akiyad often used that phrase when describing dramatic events or scenes of violence that could cause a major reaction. These included cases such as murders and serious crimes. This indirectly confirmed Maka's statement. Natalia and Maka both felt that their lives were in danger. All family members willingly cooperated with the investigators. Natalia claimed that without her daughter, she certainly would not have survived that evening. The woman called Maka her savior and asked for leniency because, in her opinion, her daughter had no other choice but to stab her father with a knife in order to stop the beating. All of this was the result of exceeding the limits of self-defense. Interestingly, both Natalia and her daughter mourned Akiyad's death. When investigators carefully examined the diaries, which listed numerous assaults committed by the man, they confirmed that the Sulayev family had been exposed to violence for years. The girl worried not only about herself and her mother, but also about her brothers. Akyad taught them to treat women in the same way his own father had taught him. The girl feared that they would grow into similar tyrants and would beat and oppress their wives and daughters. She understood that this was a feature of her people's culture, and she accepted her roots, but she could not understand the humiliation of women. Maka described in detail the difficulties she faced, especially her desire to answer back to her father. The problem, however, was that she was completely unable to do so. Physically, she had nothing with which to oppose a strong 50-year-old man, which is why she decided to buy a large knife. The purchase took place a few weeks before the tragedy. The reason was another argument. Akyad behaved so threateningly that the girl seriously feared for her mother's life and also for her own. Maka also described her attachment to her mother. According to her, Natalia was a very open and kind person, and Maka had a strong bond with her. The final entry in her diary stated that if someone found those notes, either she or her father would be dead. According to the girl, when she wrote that note, she was firmly determined to stop Akyad, but she did not seriously consider the idea of murder. The girl claimed that it had been written in a fit of anger. However, the fact that she used a knife she had prepared in advance was interpreted by law enforcement as intentional murder. Natalia and the lawyer pleaded for leniency from the beginning. They justified Maka's act as self-defense and as a necessity caused by her father's systematic tyranny. In support of this, family members described the peculiar educational measures the man used. He pulled his daughter and wife by the hair and always forced his sons to watch how women should be treated. Despite convincing evidence, Maka remained in prison after her arrest. The lawyer requested that the girl be placed under house arrest. The defense request was rejected. Natalia came every day to visit her daughter, but because of strict rules, she was not allowed in. The woman constantly asked how the girl was doing and what awaited her. At the same time, Maka also asked how her mother and the other family members were. Everyone was shocked that Akyad had died. Even Maka said that she had not expected such a turn of events. The moral questions in this case troubled the prosecution. Undoubtedly, the girl had killed a man, but the deceased had pushed her toward such actions through years of torment. Law enforcement officers collected information in order to develop the prosecution strategy. The facts were quite contradictory. The systematic beatings and humiliation Natalia described had not been officially documented anywhere. Many people in the family's immediate circle suspected nothing about the domestic violence. According to some statements, this was because sensitive issues were not made public, as well as because of the authorities' inaction after the first report. The woman worked as a dishwasher and had a lot to do, but even her colleagues suspected nothing of what was happening. The only person who knew was one of the hotel managers. Natalia herself never complained about her husband, instead attributing his behavior to cultural particularities. In her conversation with the police, she said that Akyad had mastered special techniques and knew where to strike so that no marks would remain. The woman even demonstrated his favorite grips. She also showed the carabinieri several barely visible bruises. The neighbors insisted that they had not heard screams or arguments, even though these had allegedly happened systematically for years. One woman admitted that she knew the Sulayev family, but said they had always been unsociable. They greeted each other briefly, perhaps exchanged a few words, but once they closed the door of their apartment behind them, no one heard any arguments. A friend with whom the whole family worked in a restaurant provided a great deal of valuable information. The woman knew that the reason for the final conflict in the family was Akiad's dismissal. He had quit that job a few days before the tragedy, and on the day of the killing he came and demanded that Natalia and Maka do the same. The mother knew that he had no new job lined up. She feared that she would not find a new position quickly. For that reason, she refused to obey her husband because doing so could have caused them serious financial harm. They would simply have had nothing to live on. The woman did not obey her husband and continued working. Only 3 days after the killing, she had to return to work. Now she had to keep herself and the family afloat alone. Natalia endured all these hardships stoically, but she continued to worry deeply about her eldest daughter, who was behind bars. The lawyer fought for a mild sentence. Although the girl was not released home, the defense attorney made every effort, while awaiting trial, to prove that she was an exemplary employee and student. Shortly before that, she had indeed begun college studies with excellent results. Everyone who knew Maka described her as positive, kind-hearted, and cheerful. Her classmates knew her as funny and friendly. No one suspected that behind the doors of her home there was constant violence, or that the student was capable of killing, even if for a specific reason. Everyone was convinced that Akiad's death was the result of excessive self-defense. The girl had only tried to save herself and her mother, which is why Maka received broad support. When the trial began, the lawyer described the life of the Sulayev family as full of suffering and humiliation. Akiad controlled his wife and eldest daughter and did not allow them to move anywhere without his permission. At the slightest disobedience, he punished them harshly, as if carrying out an exemplary sentence. Naturally, the defense continued to focus on the systematic terror. The lawyer insisted that all of this had been self-defense. He correctly emphasized that the girl had never had any violent episodes in her life. Even at school and in college, she had behaved very modestly and positively. The prosecution insisted that a single stab wound had already been fatal for Akiad, and that it had been completely sufficient to stop the attack. Therefore, the prosecutor interpreted the second stab wound as an intention to kill the man. The girl's actions were classified by the prosecution as intentional murder. Maka insisted that she did not want to kill her father, but only feared that her mother would die if she did not intervene. Even after the first stab, he did not stop and could have continued attacking, which is why she had to strike a second time. The prosecutor pointed out no formal complaints of domestic violence had been filed. This contradicted the story told by Natalia and Maka, who said they had turned to the police. However, law enforcement had done nothing to protect them. They did not consider turning to the police again because they feared Akiad's rage. An important role in the court's decision was played by a precedent from 2020 when a young man named Alex similarly tried to save his mother from his tyrannical father. He used a kitchen knife and stabbed the man 6 times. The father of that family also died, but the court of first instance decided that the young man had acted in order to survive. At first, he was sentenced to more than 6 years in prison, but then the Court of Appeal overturned the verdict and acquitted him. That decision caused a major public reaction. Taking that precedent into account, the defense requested Maka's complete acquittal. The lawyer relied on self-defense. However, this approach did not appear convincing to the judge. Even the prosecutor acknowledged the emotional and moral complexity of the case, since the investigation confirmed the severe ordeals that the girl and her mother had gone through. At the end of his speech, however, the prosecutor emphasized that there was no other option, because responsibility for the killing could only be attributed to Maka. The prosecutor requested a prison sentence of 7 years for the girl, which was significantly below the maximum penalty for the charges brought. The court's decision surprised both the lawyer and the prosecution, because on May 8, 2025, the court found Maka Suleyev guilty and sentenced her to 9 years and 4 months of imprisonment. Intent as an aggravating circumstance was excluded. Mitigating circumstances were taken into account. Neither the reference to a precedent nor the convincing evidence that the man had truly posed a serious danger had any effect. However, the lawyer did not give up hope for a reduction of the sentence. He filed an appeal. Until then, the first instance verdict remained in force. Thank you for watching, and take care of yourselves.